afternoon, everyone. My name is Jacqueline Seidman, and I'm a partner here at Goodman's and co-chair of the firm's Women's Success Committee. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our program in celebration of International Women's Day featuring Janet Winkler from Hacking Sophia. This program is geared towards anyone who has at any time felt overwhelmed by the shoulds, musts, and supposed tos that could sometimes hold us back from feeling like we're crushing it. These invisible, emotional, and time-consuming obligations disproportionately weigh down women, perhaps even more so during the pandemic. With only an hour together today, you are getting but a glimpse into the power of what Hacking Sophia offers. But we do hope that you will be challenged to reflect and take action in your own life. Before I introduce Janet, I'd like to remind everyone on the call today, all 300 of us, that we welcome your participation. We invite you to put any questions in the Q&A box that can be found at the bottom of your screen. I am now thrilled to pass it over to our guest of honor, Janet Winkler. Janet is an experienced business leader and entrepreneur, having founded another company, a brand consultancy, as well as having a successful career at both Procter & Gamble and McKinsey. She is now a co-founder of Hacking Sophia, an organization that partners with companies to support parents through their program called the Sophia Project. It's designed to help parents uncram by focusing on intentional subtraction. Janet will share insights from her work and offer up a few ways working parents can start uncramming and feel more successful at work and at home. And now, over to Janet.
Great. Thanks so much, Jacqueline. Yeah, I'm Janet Winkler, and I'm really delighted to be here, especially during International Women's Day Week month. We've been really inspired by the whole theory and concept and challenge to choose to challenge. So as Jacqueline said, what we're going to be talking about today is really about how to make working parent life work harder and better for us. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share a few insights from our community and all the work that we do at Hacking Sophia at the intersection of work and parent. And certainly those of you who are in it are going to, I hope the insights resonate with you and they open up your mind to really understanding your experience in a different way. Even if you're not a working parent, you will definitely learn more about their experience. But the two things that I'm going to share with you today about subtraction, they apply to everyone. We've shared this kind of content with our community and through the Sophia Project, and there's no one who doesn't relate to it. So with that, let me just give you a sense of what the Sophia Project is. As Jacqueline mentioned, it's our program where we work with partner companies to support working parents and really focus on intentional subtraction. Because the reality is, as a working parent, let alone anyone really, but the load keeps getting bigger and bigger. And if we don't subtract faster, then things are added, then we're going to be buried under the weight of all of our obligations. Because it's really hard to be successful both in work and at life, especially when you throw children into it. So today, as I say, we're going to get a little taste of the Sophia Project program. We're going to do a couple intentional subtractions and go from there. So we talk about the cram it all in years. And for most people that we've interviewed, the notion of cramming it all in resonates. I don't really have to explain what it is, but I will do that just so we're all on the same page. When we at Hacking Sophia talk about the cram it all in years, we're really focused on those years where career is accelerating and boom, you have a child or second child, third, fourth, who knows? They grow from, babies to toddlers to children to young adults. And those years we know are really hard. And certainly in the spirit of International Women's Day month, we know that it's particularly difficult for working women and working moms. And the evidence underscores it. So it was a challenge to be both a working parent and a worker pre-COVID. It's even more devastating during COVID. So again, if you're not in the cram it all in years as we describe it, you will get a benefit. At a minimum, you'll understand their experience more, and hopefully you'll learn to subtract a couple things. So the goal is not to totally change your life in the next 60 minutes and go from, cramming it all in to complete freedom. Our goal is really to share two subtractions that will identify for you and ask you to activate them. Literally, behavior change says do something fast, make a change fast, even if it's a small one, because those kinds of incremental changes will start to snowball. So that's the challenge for you today. I'm going to share two of them, and I'm going to ask you to really internalize them and think about how are you going to change your life based on that. So I admit I was a crammer. This is me and my family today. When we used to be able to go on vacation, probably about 2 years ago. I have now 3 grown children. I worked my whole life. As Jacqueline said, I started my career at Procter & Gamble, and then I founded my own insights-based brand consultancy. And right there in the middle when I started to have my kids. And then after my company was acquired by Publicis Group, I went to work for them. And then most recently, I was a senior advisor at McKinsey. So yes, I was a crammer. And I have to admit, I barely survived. Literally and figuratively, there were those times when I would crawl into bed at night and get into a fetal position and really wonder whether I was going to pull it off. Probably most concerning to me was whether my kids were going to turn out okay. And despite the alcohol here, they did absolutely turn out okay. I'm a little worse for wear, but my fears were really, would they turn out okay? Could I have a robust career? Could I grow my business? Could I support my people in the way that I really wanted to, at the level that I wanted to? And then could I survive? So yes, I did survive. My kids turned out fine, and I'm still married to the same person after 33 years. I know it doesn't instill a lot of confidence that I have a lot of wisdom to share, given the challenge that I had. But fortunately, I spent a lot of my career in understanding consumer behavior and really interviewing people to get their insights. And so I took those skills and I applied them to our work. And prior to launching Hacking Sophia, we interviewed over 100 women and men, mostly, all working, but mostly moms and dads, to really understand their experience so that we can meet their needs and meet them where they're at. What we discovered, though, was that there's so much wisdom that's stored up in people's brains, and we really tapped it. And our intention was to transfer back to the community of working parents in a bite-sized way, because no one has time to read articles, let alone read books. So to transfer that knowledge back, but also to do it in a way that really meets them where they're at, in order to help them learn, and really so they didn't have to learn the hard way. So our research is also supported. So we've now interviewed well over 200 people, but it's also supported by subject matter experts. So we engage with sociologists to help us understand what's going on in culture that shapes our behavior. We work with psychologists, with educators, and with executive coaches to really bring evidence-based wisdom to the knowledge that we share with places like today, as well as through our community. I'm also joined today in the background today by Katie Diamond, who's my co-founder. Katie was one of the hundreds of women that I interviewed prior to launching Hacking Sophia. Katie's a mom of 2 little boys. And when I interviewed her, actually, she was a mom of 1 at that time. The mission for Hacking Sophia, which is to radically improve the day-to-day lived experience and impact of working parents, really resonated with Katie as a full-time mom and a full-time working person. And so she joined me in Hacking Sophia, and we launched about a year ago. So that's the background. What I'd love to do today is start with a poll. But the poll is going to be around I'll nevers. Do you remember before you had kids, all the I'll nevers that you had? So, I'll never, things related to toys, school, children, school, to cars. I'll never drive a van. I'll never overload my kids with programs. We had so many I'll nevers that continue even as our children grow. What I want to do is take a poll to kick us off. I'm going to share in a moment a poll, that answers the following questions. Which of the following things things that you've done as a parent that maybe was an all never before you had kids? So you can select as many as apply. Let me share the answers with you, and I'll launch the poll at the same time. I'll never dump them off at grandparents, friends, anywhere that will take them without notice. I'd never shove an iPad phone device in their face just to keep them quiet. I'd never hide or lock myself away from them in the bathroom, the car, the backyard, so they won't bug me. I'll never let them eat boxed macaroni, processed food, drive through more nights than not. I'll never swear often, or use the worst swear words in front of my kids. Wish I would have thought of these, or all of the above. I'm just going to give you a second to throw your answers in the poll, just so that we can see where everybody's at. Let's throw your answers in. So what I can see, I'll share it with you in a second. I'll give it 10 more seconds so everybody has a chance to answer. Okay. So clearly, we're shoving iPads in our kids' face, hopefully unapologetically. Most of us swear. Most of us let them eat macaroni and cheese, or about a third of us do. Hid. Actually, I heard Michelle Obama say she used to hide from her kids all the time. And 17% of you were all of the above. We all have all nevers. And the reality is, we didn't make these answers up. These answers came from the community and the people we have interviewed. The reality is, excuse me, we're just humans. We're trying to manage with all this chaos around it, even before COVID. And we can't really anticipate what it's like to have children before we have them. We have all these notions, but we're not really sure. We don't have the emotional experience of having children. We certainly don't have the weight of trying to manage it all. And think about all the all nevers that you continue to say you'll never do. I will never help my kids with their homework, let alone do their homework, with their essays, with their applications to university or college. I'll never eat what's left over on their plate. We will always go out and socialize with our friends, even during COVID. And then we find ourselves hanging with our kids at night. And again, I'll never swear or have a fight with my spouse in front of our kids. We're human. This is what we do. And the reality is, even though COVID is probably a major disruption in all of our lives, children are the disruption of all disruptions. It happens really fast. It's really hard to anticipate. It changes all the time, and it lasts. It's emotionally difficult. In fact, time use studies before COVID proved that we had about 2 hours more per day in time for ourselves than we do with post-children. So think about that. 2 hours a day are wiped out from time that we used to spend doing what we wanted to do. So the disruptions of all disruptions. What I want to share with you is a few invisible forces that really weigh us down as working parents, especially in the most acute phases of the Cram It All In years. And we call them invisible forces because they're really at that psychological or social level that impacts us, that we feel but don't necessarily know for sure why. So one of the first forces I'm going to share with you is a significant shift in parenting. So this happened basically really rose and then culminated in the mid-90s, where research that was done on child development really underscored new things that we had never really proven about children. First of all, that they were moldable, and secondly, that they were vulnerable. Now, a lot of the research was done on children in disadvantaged situations, but that information and knowledge was transferred to the rest of us. And basically, what we discovered is that we could, if we worked really hard with them, especially in the early years, and engaged with them, created a positive attachment, family bonds, we could optimize their success as humans, their success as students, as workers. And that translated to all sorts of engagement with their kids that really didn't happen before. And it was called actually intensive parenting. So we intensively parented our kids. We read to them. We did crafts with them. Family time was all our time on weekends. We were engaged in their homework, hours extra per week. Now, it's really easy to say, just ignore that. Be the parent you want to be. But it's really hard when this is happening at a cultural level, and it's what's defined now as good parenting. So those people who say, just let your kids go out and play, don't get involved, that's really bucking a cultural trend that says that that's what good parenting is. It's really hard to do that. The second force that is invisible, but it's getting a lot of headlines actually during COVID, is this persistence of this idea called the ideal worker. And it really was an idea that sprung out of really the post-industrial revolution. And the concept basically was, we are dedicated to work. There's an individual, one person in the home who's dedicated to work, and there's a second person, someone else, typically the wife, who is at home managing children and household. Kids are out of sight and managed. So you showed up for work, you showed up at the time that made most sense to work, and you were full on worker, and you didn't have these other responsibilities. Somebody else took care of them. There's all sorts of evidence that that standard still persists today, and people are still living it. Someone who is managing kids is supposed to leave that at home and be full on at work. It's not as easy as the headline. And finally, there are still tenacious social norms that in fact impact our everyday. So for example, the household labor is still disproportionately owned and done by women, even in homes where both parents are working, and even in homes where people are saying, no, we split our responsibilities equally. The quantitative data doesn't match the qualitative. So the fact is that women are still doing a disproportionate amount of the household work, even though the couple claims that they share it equally. Think about these kinds of things that you hear all the time. Women tend to get, do you work full time? Or I don't know how you do it. It's not something that's commonly said to men. So these invisible forces are the things that crush us, hold us down, both men and women, working parents, and affect our day to day. So that's why we focus on intentional subtraction. Given all those pressures to make it work, we really have to get rid of stuff. And the goal is to get rid of the things that we want to get rid of, so intentionally. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to share 2 intentional subtractions that both emerged from all our interviews, as well as the evidence-based learning that we've done. The 2 are in the personal space. We also focus on the professional because people bring their whole selves to work. But today we're going to focus on kind of the easier part. So let me explain what a supposed to is, and then I'm going to get you to engage again. Supposed tos are the things you feel like you're supposed to do or be because of often externally set standards that we internalize. So externally set standards that we internalize and kind of embrace as our own. So I'm going to share 2 images in a moment, and I'm going to ask you to open the chat feature. I think you all have it. And I'm going to ask you to share 3 words, 3 ideas in the chat. When you see these images, I'm going to share 1. I'm going to share a second, then I'm going to share both. What do they suggest you're supposed to do or be? So here's 1. I'll bring it back. Here's 2, and here's both of them. Let me just give you a second. Everybody just jot 2 to 3 things in the chat. What do you see in there that suggests you're supposed to do or be? A fit mom. Happy, healthy, perfect. Fit, rich, fit, happy. Multifunctional, perfect family. Loving all the time. Be with your kids. Fit, got happy, loving. Absolutely. These are the images that actually surround us constantly. And research shows that they make us feel pretty rotten, right? These are influencers, but influencers, you don't have to be on Instagram or social media to feel the impact of what the world is telling us we're supposed to do and be. It's coming from all sorts of sources. Our psychologists talk about the experience of that, and they share this concept, which I think is really helpful, is this notion that we have this ought self, which is created of all these external forces, and then we have our actual reality. And the discrepancy or the chasm between those two things creates a terrible feeling in us. And this feeling is, am I good enough? There's a sense of frustration. It's pretty exhausting. And they say that this is a source of maternal guilt. I'm not going to get into the difference between maternal and paternal guilt, dad and mom guilt. If you want to ask about that, I can talk to it at the end. But here are the forces that shape it. Certainly these things like social media, media culture. Think about the books. There are over 100,000 parenting books on social media. And it's not just how to be a good parent, it's how to be a great parent. And then we have these norms that come from our own family, our historical family, our moms and dads. We hear often during interviews supposed tos that came from our parents that we feel and internalize we have to live up to. And then we inherit a bunch. So think about your partner and your inherited family. They come with a whole set of supposed tos that add to the ones that come from our family. And then, of course, there are all the historical, cultural, gendered norms that come with parenthood. So this is where you start to, I'm going to give you a chance. And really, this is an opportunity. It's a pause in a life that we rarely get pauses. It's a pause to look at yourself and say, okay, what supposed tos am I holding on to that don't serve me well? I'm going to make it a bit easier for you. I'm going to give you a few examples that we hear. These ones come from our sessions, but hopefully they will stimulate some thinking in you. So I'm supposed to be the problem solver for my whole family. This one comes up a lot. I'm the one who gets all the calls. I'm supposed to make nutritious meals for my family. This nutrition thing is exploded. I'm supposed to always be available for my kids. I see that came up in the chat. I'm supposed to be upbeat and happy all the time. My kids are supposed to be in clean clothes. This one just came up last week. I'm supposed to dedicate whatever free time I have to myself for being with my kids. Just a few examples to help you to get thinking about it. What I'm going to ask you to do to make this session work for you, I'm going to ask you to, just for a second, take your phone out, take a piece of paper, scrap of paper, and take 15, 20 seconds, jot down a supposed to or two that you have that's weighing you down in your life. It can be something super small or bigger than that. So I'm going to give you 15 seconds. Think about it for a moment, and then we're going to subtract. So just jot down a supposed to that you feel is permeating or just touches your life in some small way. If you want to write down a professional one, we're not getting there today, but you're sort of more than welcome to do that. Okay. So let me just give you a framework so you can take this away. It's pretty simple to remember. It's called SETS. I'll show you how you can apply it. But the thing is, you don't have to strike this supposed to. You just don't have to go gone. There are other ways to think about how do you reduce the impact in your life. So yes, you can strike it completely. You could just reduce your energy against it. You can reduce your time, or you can substitute ownership. So let me just give you quick examples. Folding laundry, this seems to be really polarizing, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway. Some people say, that's what I'm going to strike. I am not folding laundry anymore. I'm supposed to be the problem solver for everyone. You can just reduce energy. You can say no to some people and reserve energy for others. I'm supposed to spend all weekend with my kids or my family. This is time allocation. You can reduce your time. I'm going to give myself 2 hours of me time on a Saturday morning. I'm supposed to be the ones that drop my kids off at school. Substitute ownership. I don't need to be the one to do it every day. I'm going to let my village do it. I'm going to rotate with others. That just gives you some examples. Remember, you don't have to strike it, but you can take a step forward by reducing time, energy, or substituting ownership. So I'm going to give you a chance to think about, so what are you going to do with that supposed to? Are you going to strike it? Are you going to reduce your energy? Are you going to reduce your time? Or are you going to substitute ownership? Now, I've circled substitute ownership because it's where a lot of people go. We can talk about at the end, how do you do that effectively? Because it's kind of like delegation. A lot of people don't do it particularly well. So let me go to the second intentional subtraction. This one's pretty popular out there now in the world. We call it invisible labor. We're going to focus in one area today. So that's called cognitive labor. As it's described, it's really what's the weight, the labor that goes on in your brain. It's the non-physical labor that's required to keep the household afloat, that burdens your mental load. Okay, so it burdens your mental load. We're all feeling these days during COVID more than ever. I'm going to give you an example to bring it to life because it's a really important concept, and I'm sure it's something you're going to latch on to. It's the birthday party. Well, there may not be a ton of birthday parties. It's just a really good example of cognitive labor because we think a birthday party simple, right? You think, are we going to throw one or aren't we going to throw one? I'm talking about kids, but this probably applies to adult birthday parties too. You decide you're going to have one. Then you got to go to where we're going to have it, who we're going to invite, what's the date, the time. Are we going to have food, kids' food, adult food? Does anybody have an allergy? Should we have cake? Are we going to have decorations, loot bags, invitations? Before you know it, this simple birthday party turns into a whole series of cognitive labor decisions that we have to make in order to just pull it off. Going from all the way from, yes, we're going to have one, to when are we going to serve the cake? It's just one example. Don't get caught up in, we don't do birthday parties anymore. My kids are past that. They're all around us. The amount of cognitive labor that goes into grocery shopping, we've seen it now more than ever. Deciding what's for dinner. It's not just the dinner. It's all the way back from the dinner. Hiring, outsourcing, cleaning, right? You've got to find one. You've got to figure out how to pay them. You've got to set up the time. You've got to set up the time again. You've got to give them feedback. Medical, professional appointments, healthcare visits, kids, programs, camps, food, boots. Do they have boots? Do they have bathing suits? Do they have water shoes? Didn't we miss the window? There was a researcher from who was doing her PhD at Harvard who studied household labor in the home. She literally did ethnographies, went into people's homes and observed how labor was distributed. She identified Alison Daminger identified 4 phases of labor in household tasks, cognitive labor. The 4 phases are anticipating needs. Those are the things where you go, oh my God, I need to. Identifying options, thinking about, okay, what are all the options out there? Or what's a limited range of options? Actually making the choice. And then monitoring. As you can see by the example, each one of them has many different micro decisions that all make up cognitive labor. So again, it's the non-physical labor that weighs us down and creates all sorts of complexity in our brains. So it's your mental load. The issue with all of this, of course, is that there's first a ton of volume that pops into our mind at all sorts of inconvenient times. There's also a distribution problem. So I'm going to share with you what Daminger really discovered about the distribution of labor, because that was really the point of her thesis, was to understand the distribution of labor in the home. Before we do that, I'm going to just launch a second poll. And the poll is going to be around, ask you to think about which phase of cognitive labor, the stuff that's done to the brain, do you feel you disproportionately own in the home? So again, let me launch the poll. Which phase of cognitive labor do you feel you disproportionately own in your house? Select all that apply. Okay, keep going. We have about maybe a third of you, half of you, third of you. Okay, I'm going to share the results now. It's interesting. So it's actually pretty distributed. Certainly 82%, which is the highest number, say that they disproportionately own anticipating the needs. And the rest of you, somewhere around 3/4 of you, say identifying options, making choices, and monitoring. So let me share with you what Daminger found. I, of course, don't know the composition of this group, but I'm going to share with you what now Dr. Daminger found. She found that disproportionately women own anticipating needs and monitoring. And these tend to be the invisible phases. So again, anticipating needs are the ones that go, we have to, when someone else hasn't thought about it. And monitoring, did it turn out okay? Should we change something? Should we look at a different kind of program? Was the kid happy? Disproportionately, women own these. It may not be in your household. But let me talk about, just for a moment, the consequences of cognitive labor, because they are significant. And again, both men and women, parents, non-parents. First of all, it is overwhelming volume that drains our mental capacity. And what Daminger pointed out is, and we all know, that it doesn't limit itself to before work and after work and before we go to sleep. It's the kind of thing that wakes us up in the middle of the night, interferes with us during the day, and then at all points in the day, which is really the second point, because it really creates anxiety and prevents relaxation. So you are reading your book, you're relaxing, and then there's that jolt of, I forgot to do. And it does create tension in couples. We're not going to get into that today, but you can imagine that because it's invisible labor, your partner isn't seeing what you're doing. So in fact, Daminger said this is a big contributor to the unequal distribution of household labor, because the other partner just doesn't see a lot of these phases. So I'm going to pause for a second and again say, think about this is your second opportunity to at least identify a subtraction. What household tasks do you consume that consumes a lot of cognitive labor that you want to subtract? So I'm going to give you 15 seconds to individually write down some piece of cognitive labor that you now appreciate consumes a lot of your mental energy. I'm seeing meal planning, COVID screeners, spare masks, hand sanitizer. Pick your own, write it down. Kids to school. Here's what I'm going to suggest again. Use this framework. You don't have to strike everything completely. So remember, there are two parts to this, because what happens here is everyone goes to, how am I going to distribute it? How am I going to substitute ownership, which is absolutely one way to solve for this. But remember, there are all sorts of pieces of cognitive labor, examples of cognitive labor. I'll give you a few examples in a second, that just consume a ton of mental volume. And by appreciating that it's there, you may choose to strike it, reduce your energy, reduce the time you spend on it, or substitute ownership. Again, I'm going to give you some examples to make it easy, because that's, nobody needs extra cognitive labor to try and figure these out. In our program, we give hundreds so people can pull, or dozens so people can pull from them. But let me just show you how to think about I launched into multiple home improvement projects in the spring. This one is coming up now. Some people are saying, I'm just not going to do it. I'm not going to do it now. There's just too much on my plate. I coordinate multiple meetups, grandparent visits, play dates, social outings. Those take up a lot of cognitive labor and a lot of time. You can reduce your energy. I'm going to reduce the number and simplify the options. I spend a lot of time researching the best camps, activities, programs, whatever it is. I'm just going to limit how much time I spent it. It's good enough. If it's good enough, it's good enough for me. I'm the one who always manages all aspects of kids' programs. Substitute ownership. My partner will handle whether it's one kid, two kids, but all aspects of programming. So literally, take 15 seconds. You very rarely get to pause and look at your cognitive labor that you wrote down, the example of a household task that requires a lot of work, and think about, okay, what am I going to do? How am I going to reduce the mental capacity here, my cognitive load? Okay. Let me just answer one question. If you want to ask in the Q&A about cognitive labor, we can talk about too and how to distribute it. But certainly one of the big questions we get in all of our sessions, especially around anticipation, because someone says, I'm always the one who anticipates the household labor. Is it learnable? And the experts, our psychologists, say, absolutely it is learnable. But I'm just going to ask you, think about this. Is your partner or whoever you're working with or whoever you share household tasks with, or distribute them to, are they capable of showing up for work with their computer or showing up for meeting prepared? It's all project management. And it starts from what's the outcome we want, and you work your way back to the different, to the different activities. So it's absolutely learnable. There will be failures. And think about the learning curve at work. When you transfer responsibility to someone else, they don't necessarily, and generally they don't get it done perfectly or get it done good enough the first time. So you have to tolerate the learning curve and step back, because if you don't step back and you don't intervene, then you're just going to be back in and doing the work, and you're not reducing your cognitive labor. And all the work is going to boomerang right back at you. So there's a lot to talk about in that area, but wanted to give you a taste of two subtractions and think about going out in the world and seeing the supposed to's. I'm going to wrap up with a few slides, then we're going to open it up to the Q&A. For those of you who are not in the Cram in years at the moment, and particularly those most acute years, and you have people who you work with, especially who either report into or work around you, I really want to share a few last thoughts, and then I'll summarize for everyone. The challenge isn't going to go away when kids are for sure in school and they get to go off and do their summer programs. Being a working parent was really difficult prior to COVID. In fact, we launched Hacking Sophia prior to COVID because we knew the experience of working parents from all the interviews we've done is extremely difficult, and even more difficult today than it was when you were a parent. So it's not going to go away. Certainly some things are going to get better, but it still isn't going to go away. The second thing is this notion of practicing active empathy, which is the image here. Empathy is not feeling sorry for people. Empathy is literally putting yourself into their shoes and understanding the experience from their perspective. And, the common phrase out there now is that EQ trumps IQ in leadership. And I've seen that in my own experience, working over 30 years in leadership positions, is that people want to be led, not just by people who are smart and capable and can teach them, but people who can understand them and speak to them as humans. So we all learn from super smart bosses, but people create followership by those who, by leading people and understanding where they're coming from. And it's the little things, the day-to-day lived experience that can undermine, if it's not done well, can undermine even most expensive benefit programs. So it's about the day-to-day lived experience. So let me wrap it up for everyone with 3 points to take away, and then we'll open up for Q&A. First of all, go out there now in the world. When we talk about these invisible forces, there's societal forces that shape your behavior. Go out literally after this session and start thinking about, what are all the supposed to's that are invading my life that no longer service me? They may be something that you'd still like to do, but this is ruthless prioritization. And you just have to say, I can't do some of these now. And think about cognitive labor. It's a term that hopefully won't leave you like the supposed to's. It's really about that mental load, all the things that we do, certainly in household tasks, but there's a lot of it that goes on at work too. And make a choice, activate a subtraction, because this is really what we can control. And again, all of our behavioral scientists and all of the people we work with say one of the most important things in behavior change is making the first step. So make one small step pretty quickly, and you'll see a snowball effect, because you'll go, well, that was pretty good. I uncrammed a little, let's try more. Second thing is, especially as working parents, and especially during COVID, it's really hard to feel successful. It was really hard to feel successful before as both a working parent and someone who's trying to crush it at work. But it's even harder now. So give yourself a bit of a break. Don't ask yourself, don't make it binary. Did I subtract or not? Think about, or black and white. Did I do something that helped me get closer to my goal? Did I subtract a little and lighten my load just a little? And lastly, shameless plug here, please join us in the Sophia project. This is where we really focus on intentional subtractions, because so many of our interviews that now, I said we've done over 200 of them, people talked about they wish they would have edited their life earlier. They held on to things for too long, and it weighed them down and made it really difficult to achieve the kind of success they wanted to achieve. And one last thought. Thank you all. I'm going to open it up in a second for Q&A and bring Jacqueline back in. But if you want to reach out, if you'd like to be interviewed, we'd love to hear about your experience. I can be reached at jwinkler@hackingsophia.com. You can go to our website. Please sign up for our newsletter. It's a weekly bite-sized wisdom, professional and personal space. And if you, even though I've made Instagram kind of evil today, there's lots of good content out there too, which we believe we are. Follow us on Instagram. So thank you.
Thanks, Janet. So clearly your presentation so far has resonated, because I'm opening the Q&A and I already see a bunch of questions. So hopefully we can get to all of them. So I'll just read them off in order. So the first one is, what is the first step in distributing invisible labor?
Okay, so the first step is actually to have the conversation. So what I would say is, sit down with whoever you're going to share it with, and share the concept of cognitive labor, because it is invisible. And so, number one, share the concept. Then sit down with your person and talk about how it feels. Right? That it's important to say, I've just got too much on my plate, and here are all the things that I'm doing, and here's all the work that's behind it. I would absolutely caution you, though, don't enter that conversation with anger, because it's invisible. So you may find that your partner, someone who's supporting you, people you outsource to, they may not see it. So all the anger that's building in you, they may not know. So go into that conversation without anger and assumptions attached to it. And finally, you've got to share the load. But what's really important, I guess, two things are important. Number one, distribute a whole task. If you hold on to something, then you're going to be involved and it's really not going to lighten your load. And like I said earlier, like delegation, you have to step back and really not criticize the outcome. Because once you do that—
Sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you.
Sorry, that was my Siri. I think I was trying to offload to her.
We're not having trouble hearing you.
Thanks. If you jump in and criticize, it's going to just boomerang right back at you. You have to wait for the learning curve.
That's a great one. So we have another one here. This is a question about how to limit our cognitive labor around managing screen time for kids during the pandemic. So we've tried many things and failed, and it seems as soon as the parents are doing something else, the iPads are everywhere. I think it's also the pressure that we aren't doing as good a job as parents if we let them hang on screens too much. So will that work? So any insights into that?
Sure. So we've talked to our subject matter experts a lot about this one. And I would say the first thing is remember this idea of perfect parenting. And it's a standard that we just are not going to want to live up to. We're not going to be perfect parents. We have to be good enough parents. So when we beat ourselves up about screen time or giving our kids meals that aren't 100% healthy all the time or 80% healthy, we've got to give ourselves a break, especially during COVID. We're all just trying to hang on. So the thing is, really decide what can you live with and drop your bar, because we're not going to live up to the standard. And then have a discussion. This is how much we're going to give you. And you have to, as parents, you have to create boundaries and be consistent. But most importantly, give yourself a break. If I can add one more thing, Jacqueline, I'm going to throw this out there. There's this whole shift from me time to we time. And parents are not getting enough me time. And so if the iPad is your me time, go do something with it. Throw them on it and do something for you, because we just are not investing enough in ourselves.
That's great. So we have a few participants that picked up on your invitation to ask about hearing a little bit more about mommy guilt and daddy guilt.
So sure. So we've done some research into it. There's not a lot of research on dad guilt, but we were able to discover, our specialists were able to discover some. And first of all, there is a rise of involved fathering. So it used to be that it was all about the mother, and now there's certainly a rise in a desire and an expectation that there's more equal parenting. Mom guilt tends to be more a feeling of guilt that what I'm going to do is going to impact how my kids turn out. And I actually referenced that earlier in my own experience. Are they going to turn out okay if I'm not available to them all the time? Or if not, I'm not a good enough mom all the time. Are my kids going to turn out okay? That's the guilt that mom feels. It's exacerbated for working moms because they feel like they're away from their kids. So they have to be super moms when they're with their kids. Dad guilt's a little different. It's more about regret. And it tends to be longer term. I wish I would have been there for it. It's kind of like FOMO, right? Not that FOMO is easy to handle, but it's, I wish I would have been there, been with them, rather than the guilt of what's going to become of them if I don't get involved with them. Again, this is research. It doesn't mean it applies to everyone, but those are the general themes. Is it's more guilt about the impact that it's going to have on my kids and are they going to turn out okay? And regret. I wish I would have been there.
That's helpful. Thanks, Janet. Another question we have is about what tips do you recommend for limiting the supposed tos or the bombardment of information out there on how to be great?
Right. So again, the first thing in changing behavior is just to recognize them and see them for what they are. which are supposed tos. And having an awareness that this is coming from these sources is really the important first step, and making a choice about what you're going to do with them. I would tell you that in our sessions, what comes up often is that people are really deciding to limit social media, because it is a toxic place for establishing supposed tos. I give you two little examples today. Think about the hundreds that you're bombarded with every day. And so you can make a choice not to engage with that, not to engage that in a big way.
That's great. Another question that just came in is, what if I'm already doing 75% of what you mentioned, but I'm just not sure how to get to the next level? Any tips to get to the next level?
Yeah, so I would say a couple tips. Number one, keep looking out there, looking at what else can I subtract with intention. Okay, we say intentionally because you don't want to drop the things, just have them drop unknowingly, but you want to make choices. So keep subtracting. And the other thing I would say is drop your bar a little bit. We all have these threshold levels of what good looks like, and overachievers, which I bet majority of the people on this conference set really high bars on everything. So really be choiceful about what really matters to you. Is it really critical that something is done in this kind of way, or can you drop your bar a little bit? Because it's like strategy. Let's face it, we're all involved in strategy all day. Strategy is choices. And so it's about the choices that we make and what we're going to subtract and the bar we're going to set.
That's great. A couple more here. Janet, you mentioned there are subtractions in our work life too. Can you share a few?
Sure. So the subtractions, we do a whole session on subtractions. It tends to be very focused on, it tends to be environment based, but let me give you a few of them. First of all, the one that is most common now is the feeling that you have to be always on and always available. And what we find when we do this with groups within companies, for sure, is that it's an assumption people hold on to that isn't necessarily true. And so you have to challenge in the spirit of choose to challenge. Do you have to be always on and always available? It's not sustainable. An organization is not going to hold on to their people if they're always going to be always on and always available. So that would be a subtraction. Again, it doesn't have to be strike it. I will never be on or never be available, but create some boundaries around it. The second thing is supposed tos. I hate to say this one, but it's still true. That women are supposed to do the admin, take the notes, the parties, deciding what's going to be done for an activity. That supposed to for women has to be distributed, because nobody gets promoted for being the one who's going to create the idea for the company party. And the other supposed to that I'm going to throw out there is that working harder is the formula for success. Okay. I'm not going to say no parent. It is an unwinnable calculation for working parents, because the downside, the trade-off is so great. So the assumption that working harder is going to achieve success is something that people hold on to it as an assumption and isn't necessarily true. In fact, Jacqueline, one more thing. If you ask most people who are in leadership positions or excelled, sure, they worked hard, but they figured out how to find their superpower, how to find their expertise and really leverage it. I see you're nodding.
Yeah, hopefully. Great. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think it probably resonates with a lot of the participants on the call today. Janet, maybe we'll ask one last question. Apologies if we didn't get to your question, but feel free to email Janet directly. What do you see as the best practice across companies who make it a priority to support working parents?
Okay, so that's a really important question, and
in 3 minutes or so.
3 minutes or so. I'll give you some highlights for sure. um, we don't, we support and believe that all of the kinds of benefits and programs that companies deliver to their employees and offer to their employees are really important. So, parental leave, extended maternity leave, childcare benefits, all that kind of stuff. We deal with the everyday. And from an everyday standpoint, it sort of goes to one of my final slides, is that best practices are companies that walk the talk. And that comes out in the micro interactions. Literally, almost to an interview, people can remember and hold on to the soul-sucking moment when somebody did something to him or said something that wasn't really human first. So, kid fell this morning, cracked their head, they're down at sick kid, sorry, I can't make it. They get back into the office, they respect the boundary or get back online, and nobody asks, how's your kid doing? Those are the soul suckers that just make you feel like you're not in an environment that really cares about you. Similarly, so it's those micro everyday, and one last thing, now kids, oh, it's so fun that they joined in on a Zoom call. Well, when that same parent says, I have to log off because I have to go do something with my kid, the same person who said, no, it's okay for your kids to be on this Zoom call, they have to be also the one that's going to say, you know what, I know you've got that priority right now. It's okay. Just go do what you have to do. So, Jacqueline, what I would say, it's about the everyday lived experience and all the signals and cues and the way we interact with people that says we understand you're human, you have a whole life, and you are really dedicated to being successful at work. And we understand that, but we know you have a whole set of responsibilities, and we understand that too.
That's great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to all of the participants who joined us today. And Janet, thank you so much for sharing your insights. For any organization that would like to learn more about Hacking Sophia's full program offering, we've posted the information in the chat, and we'll of course also send it in our follow-up email to attendees. So that brings our session today to a close. Thank you everyone so much. Have a great afternoon, and looking forward to seeing you all soon. Bye for now.